Hey everyone, this video is on effects of changes to the exchange rate. So this follows on from the first video. So if you haven't seen that one, please make sure you check that one out first. But essentially what we're looking at here is we've already done the things that actually affect changes to the exchange rate. We've done them about what the exchange rate is, so we're done with that. Now we're moving on to, okay, well, when the exchange rate changes, what is the effect on three specific things? It's kind of more than three actually, but we've got the current account balance, we've got the three macroeconomic goals, and we've got living standards. So we've got, okay, when the exchange rate appreciates or depreciates, what is the effect on those five things? All right, so let's start with the current account balance. Now, for each of these, what I've tried to do is give you guys a key idea on each of these effects, because that's going to help you answer, well, what do I actually talk about to get me through to this answer? Okay, so the key idea here on the current account balance, as it always is credits and debits. All right, so I'm going to split the screen here on what happens when the exchange rate appreciates, and then we're going to go on to the depreciates one. So this is kind of hopefully an interactive one, and I want you guys to pause the video when I ask you a question, which is essentially what's going to come up in these orange boxes. All right, so when the exchange rate appreciates, I want you to pause the video or just yell it out if you know. It's all right, no one's looking, no one's listening, on whether the AUD, when it appreciates, gets stronger or weaker. And when it appreciates, it gets stronger, which means it goes further. A little bit of a tip that I like to think about is an elite, pardon me, an elite athlete that becomes stronger can run further and can go further into the game. All right, so just like when the exchange rate appreciates, it gets stronger. Your $1 of Australian currency can go further and buy more things overseas. That then helps you answer the next two areas, which are the most important for exchange rate. You guys have to know when the exchange rate gets stronger or weaker, what the effect is on imports and exports, because that's going to get you through to the rest of the answer. So, when the exchange rate appreciates, the AUD gets stronger. Does that mean that imports become relatively cheaper or more expensive? Pause if you need to think, otherwise yell out the answer. And if our dollar goes further, it means imports become relatively cheaper. We don't need as many Australian dollars for the shoes and the shirts and the cars and all the things we import because our dollar is stronger. And on the flip side, exports then become relatively more expensive. That's right. Because our dollar is stronger, other countries need to use more of their currency in order to buy the same amount of goods and services. All right, now we're going back to this key idea here on the current account balance. So credits and debits. Because of this, we need to kind of ask ourselves on the current account, which don't forget is all international transactions with no future financial obligation. When the exchange rate appreciates or gets stronger, does that mean there are more credits or debits on the balance on goods and services? That's what BOGS is, balance on goods and services, which is the goods and services part of the current account. So have a look at it, think about it. If you need to pause the video, please do. And when the exchange rate appreciates, there are more debits on the balance on goods and services. Why? Because we're importing more goods and services because they're cheaper. Things are cheaper, so you know what? I'm not going to buy that locally made good or service. I'm now going to import it. And also on the other side, what's going to happen? Are there less debits or credits? Well, this one's kind of pretty self-explanatory. If there's more debits, well, that means there's less credits. Why is there less credits? Because our exports here that we're selling are more expensive. And so as a result, we've got a loss in international competitiveness. So it works on both sides here. So if we have more debits and less credits, what's the overall position on the current account? Is it going to move towards surplus or further into deficit? Pause the video, have a think. And the answer here is further into deficit. Obviously, we're assuming here when we've got our balance of payments here, if this is our current account and that's our capital and financial account, we're assuming that the current account here is below the balance line, which means it's in deficit currently. And if we have more debits than credits, then that's going to push that seesaw further that way. All right. Now, the good news about this, guys, is when we do depreciate, it's just the other way around. Okay. So what I would recommend is that you learn one way. Yeah. Learn one way. I always just learn, well, it has been depreciating in reality now, so maybe learn that way, and then just know if you get the question for the other one to switch your answers around. So when the exchange rate depreciates, well, it's going to get weaker. It goes less far. We're going to need more of our currency to import goods and services, and therefore imports become more expensive and exports become relatively cheaper. That's going to result in more credits on the balance of goods and services and less debits. And therefore, if there's more money coming in than there is going out, then that is going to move the seesaw. So if here we are here, if we're currently here, and that's the current account, and that's the capital and financial account, it's going to move the seesaw this way, closer to surplus, because there's more credits than debits. So go over this section if you need to, but the key idea here is you've got to link to credits and debits. All right, moving on. We're going to go on now to the goal. So the effect of a change in the exchange rate on the goal of low inflation. Now, these are the same key ideas we've been learning all year. So when we're linking through to the goal of low inflation, your key idea here on the demand side is surplus or shortage, and your key idea on the supply side is any change to cost of production. All right, so we're going to kind of split them out here. You'll notice the top section here of your answer is exactly the same as before. And that's great news. So any question you get that asks you to link a change in the exchange rate to any of these 5 things, the first mark is always going to be the same. Nice and easy. When the exchange rate appreciates, the AUD gets stronger, imports become relatively cheaper, and exports become relatively more expensive. So the sooner you can understand and remember those things, guys, the easier your life is going to be. Because all you got to do is get to this position, and then your key idea comes in. Yeah, so figure out what happens with exports and imports, then get to your key idea. With this one, we've got to get to income for exporters. All right, so when imports become relatively cheaper, what's going to happen to, and exports become relatively more expensive, this one here, are we selling more or less exports? And we're probably selling less exports, aren't we? So as a result, income for exporters fall. And if people and businesses who export things are getting less income and less money, are they spending more or less in the economy? Well, they're going to be spending less. And then so what do we have here? Do we have widespread economic surpluses or shortages? Pause the video or just yell it out. If incomes fall, what's going to happen? We're going to have widespread surpluses, okay? And as a result, what's going to happen to the prices in the economy? They're going to fall. Now let's see if it's the same on the aggregate supply side. So imports here become relatively cheaper, okay? So if imports become cheaper for importers, their cost of production is going to increase or decrease. And their cost of production will decrease, it's going to fall. And then so they're going to pass on those cost savings in the form of lower prices. What you're going to find, guys, is both the AD and the AS sides both contribute to average prices increasing or decreasing, falling. Okay, both of those things are working in the same direction. All right, so what I'm going to do now, here is your next section. Try to cover up the left-hand side, all right, and have a go at this. Pause the video. We're not going to go one by one for this. I'm going to get you guys to see if you can do it all at once, and then I'm going to quickly go through it all. So pause the video here and write down your answers. All right, here we go. Hopefully you realized that the first 3 are exactly the same as the one before we did for current account balance. Okay, when the exchange rate depreciates, the AUD gets weaker, so imports become more expensive and exports become cheaper. That means we're going to get, here we go, income for exporters goes up, therefore they're going to spend more money in the economy, and so we're going to have economic shortages. Then suppliers are going to increase prices to clear those shortages. Cost of production for importers is going to go up. Okay, and as a result, they're going to pass on those cost increases in the form of higher prices both of those are going to cause us to have an increase in the average price. Let's go strong and sustainable economic growth. Key idea here is production levels. Don't forget, this economic growth is GDP. Economic growth and GDP are the same thing, okay? So I've kept these here. I've taken out the orange little boxes now because it's the same for every single one. So I'm not going to go over that again in this video. So when the exchange rate appreciates, what happens to net exports based on what's going on here and what's going on here, actually, both of them for that matter. And what we're going to find is there is a decrease in net exports, okay, because we're importing and we're substituting local production for imports, plus our exporters are not selling very much stuff. All right, and as a result, aggregate demand is going to fall. This one's nice and easy. If aggregate demand falls, boom, what's going to happen to the production level? It's going to fall as well. And it's the reverse here. Okay, so when net exports increase, aggregate demand increases, and therefore production levels increase. This one's pretty straightforward. All right, let's move on to the full employment goal here. So our key idea here is the derived demand for labor. And don't forget, full employment's pretty straightforward because all we do is do what we did for GDP and add on one extra step. Okay, so what did we say before? So when we have an appreciation of the exchange rate, what happens to GDP? GDP decreases, yeah, because our net exports fall. And if GDP decreases, our derived demand for labor, you got it, decreases. And then so nice and easy for the other side. When the exchange rate depreciates, exports become relatively cheaper. So we export more stuff, more net exports, more AD, GDP increases. And in order to react to that, we need more production. So therefore we need more workers. Therefore the derived demand for labor increases. And then finally, we're going to go into living standards. Again, this one isn't too complex. Your key idea here, as we always do, is access to goods and services. When that changes, living standards change. So this one, how you approach it, though, is a little bit different, okay? Because the effects here are two different effects. And I'll explain what that means in a little bit. Okay, so let's just go on the import side first, okay? Imports become relatively cheaper when the exchange rate appreciates, okay? And as a result, when we're buying our imports, do we have more or less money left over? Well, we're going to have more money left over, and thereby, what's going to happen to our access to goods and services? It's going to increase our access to goods and services. Just to give you an example, let's say I have $100 in my pocket, and I before was spending $50 on imported goods and $50 on domestically made goods and services. If I now only need to spend $40 on those imported goods because they're relatively cheaper, well, I've then got $60 that I can now spend on locally made goods and services, okay? Not just the 50 I had before, so my access to goods and services increases. However, there is a mitigating factor here, okay? Exports become relatively more expensive, and we've got to think of our poor exporters here because what's happened to their level of income when we have an appreciation of the exchange rate? What happens to the income? It falls for them. There's less income for exporters, and so for those parts of the economy, there is a decreased access to goods and services. So a discuss question can really kind of let you talk about these two, or if it's just an explain, just pick one of the sides. So finally, and obviously the reverse when the exchange rate depreciates. All right, so just to recap, key ideas. Most important is you know what happens to relative price of exports and imports. Yeah, know when the exchange rate appreciates, imports become cheaper and exports become more expensive. That is critical to you getting through any of these ideas. All right, next you show the effect on the element using the key idea of it. Yeah, so balance of payments is current account deficit is all about credits and debits. Inflation is all about surpluses and shortages or cost of production and so on and so forth. And then don't forget to actually answer the question. Okay, so your final mark will be, okay, well, what happens to the current account deficit? Does this help us achieve or get us further away from achieving the goal? Or will it increase or decrease living standards? So hopefully that helped, guys. Hopefully it was clear. Good luck and thanks for tuning in. Economics is the best. You follow the process, you do the work. It kind of shows how things around you work. It's kind of cool.